Fruitful Living with Sissel Anderson. Here on Morning Joy, where truth matters.
God's will sometimes takes us quite a bit of a different direction than we initially planned, but also, hey, we get closer to God. The more those changes don't bother us. We're talking all about this with Sissel Anderson. My name is Keith Downey, host of Morning Joy. Wow, good morning to you, Sissel.
Good morning, Keith. Let's talk about God's will and our will.
That's always sometimes is a tough one to push through, especially when we have these ideas of what we want to do, and we're like, God, can you be on board with this plan too?
Please? Yeah, I think that's something that's really, really beautiful about our faith journey is that when we say a prayer out to God, a common thing, at least I know I have said, is that I try, I've always tried, Lord, like, let me follow your will, whatever your will be done has been something I add to the end of my prayers a lot. Like I'm asking, like, I totally want this path, but your will be done. And I had to start adding somewhere in my teen years, and help me to be okay with it. Like whatever you choose, like your will be done, and help me to be okay with it in the end. Because the way that we look at life sometimes is that we have the way that we think our life is going to go. We have a path that we think we're going to take daily and like overall. Like every day you might say, okay, I'm going to get this, and this done. And then something happens and you go well off that little path. And then also your general life trajectory. Like maybe you thought like when you were younger, you were going to get married and then you were called to religious life or vice versa, There's always going to be a change in our path. But what's really, really wild, what I have found, and I'm curious to know if this has affected you before, Keith, is that first off, I'm sure you've experienced, and if not, whoa, crazy, that your will has been slightly different than what God's will has been, and how you've sometimes taken a completely different path than you thought you would.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've gone against the grain, so to speak. I mean, like initially, I wanted to be an actor. I wanted to be, someone living in either the big cities and like going for it, so to speak. But after a while, I had to listen to God's will and stop going against what his will was. And once you do it, it's like, okay, this is a lot. It may not be easier, but things tend to be more peaceful, as I noticed.
Yeah, and that's the really big part is that I think a lot of people, especially out in the culture, would, if they heard your story being like, I wanted to make it big in Hollywood, I wanted to do this, go down this particular path, and you say that you're no longer doing like that in particular, I think you're doing some other cool, awesome things, but something a little bit different, they might say, wow, he didn't make it, he didn't do what he wanted to do, and he must be miserable. Right. But what's the really, really crazy, mind-blowing thing that I've realized, especially in the last couple of years, is how crazy it is how God can change your attitude on it. Like you think that you're going to be upset and miserable following his will, but you, without even noticing sometimes, your attitude has changed. Your thought process towards it has changed. It's adjusted. And it's so crazy to me because I have said out loud there are things I would never do. Like to my friends and family, like I'd say, I would never do this. I don't ever want to do this. And then like a year later, I'm doing that thing that I said I never wanted to do, and I'm not mad about it. I'm like, when did that happen? When did that adjustment happen? It kind of goes, when we say our prayers and, when I say things like, Lord, your will be done, and let me be okay with it. Sometimes I'm just throwing it out there to God, and I forget that he's answering those. I prayed it. He answered it. He said, yeah, I will help you, be okay with it. I'm going to help you be satisfied with this, because at the end of the day, the closer we get align our will to God's, the more satisfied and more peaceful we will be. Kind of like you were saying, having that peace, Keith.
Yeah, it's looking at like my colleagues back then, or my the co-students. I don't know what you would ever call them when I was going to college. If they were to see me like backing out, they'd probably say like, "Oh, he failed."
Right.
Like that must have affected him in some way or another. And I think if I didn't have my Catholic faith to understand like, oh, it didn't work out, well, that's probably because that's not what God wanted me to do. I would probably view myself as a complete lack and utter failure and, spiral down into whatever. So, yeah, I think having that view of, yes, this is God's will. He's probably opened up another door. I know he has. I just maybe haven't seen it yet. And then when I have that frame in mind, it typically, then he like changes the direction and I see it and I go with it, try to go with it, try not to be too too stubborn about it. But
there's always that little bit of a stubbornness that we have to get over. There's two people I'm thinking of that are decently well known. Father Stu, the movie that was made a while ago, he also wanted to make it big in Hollywood. And then I don't know if you've ever heard of Sister Clara Crockett. She is probably a little less known, but there's a beautiful documentary on YouTube about her. She is a religious sister from Ireland that ended up in Central America or South America. I can't remember off the top of my head. And actually tragically died in an earthquake a few years ago. But she also wanted to make it big in Hollywood, and she wanted to be famous. She wanted to be known. Same thing with Father Stu. They wanted to be known. And it's crazy how God not only will change our will to, to be closer and aligned to His and make us really very satisfied with it. In their lifetime, they were very satisfied with what they were doing. They were so at calm and at peace. But they kind of did end up being kind of famous, if you think about it. Yeah. And it's crazy because God will, in the end, He does obviously take into account our desires in, what He wants to do, just maybe in a completely different way than we think. I was interviewing a gentleman here locally in DFW at a carnival that I was at over the weekend, and he said the phrase, "Be careful what you pray for." And I thought that was really funny because he was saying that he was praying about how to get closer to God, be more involved, and then suddenly the next, on his 8th day of this novena, he was doing the surrender novena. A guy from church says, "Do you want to be the co-chair of this carnival?" And he was just like, "Oh, that's okay." I didn't think that was the way that this was going to be answered, but okay. But he loved it, and he was getting great, joy out of doing it, even though it's a hard job, obviously, and not what he maybe started this prayer thinking was going to happen. But I think it's just important to remember that following God and being on this pilgrimage of life and our Christian journey requires us to change. We don't always like to change, because people think oh, don't change who you are. And I'm like, kind of do. That's kind of what you're supposed to do. kind of the whole point. There's a really amazing book if you want to kind of really dive deeper into this topic of aligning our wills with God, and it's Uniformity with God's Will by, say, Alphonsus Liguori. And it's actually a very short book, but it's a very deep book. So don't be deceived by this tiny little book. It's almost like a pamphlet, but it is extremely deep. And it's all about the topic of how, I think he says something along the lines of the essence of perfection is to embrace the will of God in all things, prosperous and adverse. And so he's saying that our perfection is made by aligning wills with God. He gave an example, I think, also of saying someone saying if God's will is to be humiliated, they want to be humiliated. If they are poor, they want to be poor. In short, whatever happens to them is acceptable to them. Hence, they are truly at peace in this life. In cold and heat, in rain and wind, the soul united to God says, "I want it to be warm, to be cold, windy, to rain, because God wills it." So that's not something we, as soon as we jump on the faith train that we can achieve. Usually it takes, I think, many, many years of practice. I'm nowhere near that. I still get very frustrated when my plans don't go the way that I think they are going to go on a day, and things get derailed. I wake up in the morning and I say, I'm going to get this, and this done, and something happens that is completely off of that. But I've tried to learn to embrace the beauty in the unexpected, and the beauty in the, hey, God has put this before me right now, and this is what my priority is.
That's a good point you make. And it also reminds me of when I'm, praying and I'm like, oh, please, Lord, I need more humility in my life, or I need more wisdom. And then when I ask for humility, I start making these mistakes, and instead of acting prideful and just defending myself, I have to realize, okay, this is an opportunity here. Okay, let me act in humility. This is what I asked for.
I did in fact ask for this.
And then when I'm like, okay, I need more patience, Lord, please help me get more patience. Then, someone cuts me off in traffic, and it's like, are you kidding me? People have been cutting me off. This is insane. And then I realized, oh,
that was my opportunity.
I too asked for this. Okay. Well, like you were mentioning before, be careful what you pray for, because your prayers will be answered in one way or another.
I know someone who does give some talks, a Catholic speaker in the area, and she said before she went up to give a talk in front of a large group of people, she had prayed, Lord, keep me humble while I do this. And she walks up to the microphone, and her tooth falls out, like in front of everybody. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And so she's like, well, okay.
Wow.
Keep me humble, Lord. And so, yes, recognize that when you say a prayer like that, the Lord, so whenever I would say that I was, needing to grow in humility, she's like, he will humble you. So be careful.
Absolutely.
But also it's very beautiful to be able
yeah.
to completely let go and embrace that.
Yeah, and I think what helps me is having a sense of humor, because I recognize, I'm like, okay, Lord, I see what you did there.
Yep.
Okay, this is helping me spiritually. You're testing me, and this is making me spiritually stronger, kind of what we were talking about on the Next Right Thing. So that way we can, be true disciples of God. And so while it may seem annoying when something like that is initially happening, I think it's helpful. And you always mention it, Sissel, to always have a strong prayer life, because then you'll start recognizing and seeing these as opportunities instead of roadblocks.
Yeah, because if you don't have a prayer life, or a very good, consistent one, more often than not, you're not even going to recognize those times when God has completely altered the way that you think about something and changed you. And those are such beautiful opportunities to just see his great mercy and see him working in your life. So everyone this week, take some time, ask God, maybe say the prayer of, your will be done. And if you need to add at the end and help me be okay with it, do that as well. And if you want to pick up Uniformity with God's Will, it's actually free online in many places in a PDF. So if you want to start reading that, it's a great opportunity to do it this week.
Yeah, some great light reading from what you were.
Nice and light. I mean, it is light. It is physically light.
Physically light, but
mentally not.
Yeah, it's like cutting into a nice, rich steak. Wow, thank you so much, Sissel, for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you every single Wednesday. We can also catch you on Fridays on Back to the Father, as you produce that on YouTube. So make sure to put that to 1 p.m. Central Fridays. And that is the end of our first hour of Morning Joy. Now, we understand you got a lot of work to do. I'm sure it's the middle of the week, so we understand if you have to hop off. We'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Central, 7 a.m. Eastern. You can also catch the entirety of Morning Joy on Rumble or YouTube. Just search Morning Joy Radio or GRN Online. But if you're still hanging around with us, we're going to take a quick break and return on a second hour of Morning Joy, where truth matters. So stay tuned, grab another cup of coffee, tea, whatever gets it going on the morning, and we'll see you right here on Morning Joy.
This has been Morning Joy, where truth matters, hosted by Keith Downey. Take some joy with you today. Visit grnonline.com/joy to listen again, share a segment, or answer the question of the day. That's grnonline.com/joy.